The rulebook is there to prepare for weird situations, such as the one we always ask, like what if the ball is lodged in the catcher's or umpire's mask? That is covered in Rule 5.09G, saying, runners advance one base if a pitch ball lodges in the umpire's or catcher's mask or paraphernalia. An example can be seen in the 2016 game between the Dodgers and Diamondbacks, with 2 outs and runners on first and third. Ross Stripling threw a curve in the dirt that bounced up and hit Yasmani Grandal under his mask, which knocked it off. Then the ball went behind his chest protector. Confused, he touched the outside of his chest, then pulled his protector and watched it fall to the ground. Afterwards, Stripling was charged with a wild pitch, and Jake Lamb, who was at third, was awarded home, while David Peralta went to second. This originated from a 2005 incident between the Indians and Royals, where a similar situation took place. Cliff Lee threw a pitch that got stuck in Victor Martinez's protector, and the umpire correctly awarded the runner at third home. So this rule literally prevents a hidden ball trick. Our next rule really focuses on what players are supposed to do, and that's focus. This rule is designated to the designated hitter. As Rule 6.10b15 states, a designated hitter is specifically prohibited from sitting in the bullpen unless serving as a bullpen catcher. This rule was added to the DH rule in 2010, along with the rule clarifying that if a starting pitcher shall bat for himself, he should be named twice with 10 players on the lineup. And if the starting pitcher is replaced, he can continue as a DH, but he can no longer pitch. And if the DH is replaced, he can pitch, but he cannot hit. This weirdly worded rule kind of prevents a pitcher/DH from working between appearances on the mound, and also prevents them from hanging out with his friends in the bullpen unless he's their catcher. Similar to how Shohei Ohtani was seen in the bullpen in the 2023 WBC Finals, where he was the DH, and of course later came out to close the game. Of course, the Ohtani rule being made in 2022, which allows the starting pitcher who is also the DH to remain as the DH after being taken off the mound. But as far as Rule 6.10b15, I do not recall Ohtani being his own bullpen catcher, so I think the WBC title should be taken away and be given to a random country drawn from a hat. A rule that in itself is a little strange but makes total sense is a runner being out if they touch a fair batted ball before it touches an infielder, whether they are standing on base or not. But there is an exception. That rule now reorganized to Rule 5.09b7 that states, a runner is out when they are hit by a fair batted ball, whether they are on base or not, except when the infield fly rule is called. In that case, they are not out if hit by the ball while on base, but are still out if hit by the ball off a base. The infield fly rule comes into effect when there are runners on in double play situations with less than 2 outs, and a pop-up is hit to the infield. The batter is automatically out, while the runners can advance at their own risk. What this rule does is give fairness to the runners, who almost always go back to the base. And if the ball were to hit them in this situation, it obviously would not be fair to call the runner and batter out. This is a combination of rules that go back to the 19th century to prevent batters and runners from taking advantage of situations. Here's one we hope players, coaches, and managers take advantage of, as they are allowed to sit in the stands after being ejected. A rule certain players and managers are very familiar with is Rule 4.07, which says when a manager, coach, or player is ejected, they shall leave the field immediately and take no further part in that game. The next part says he shall remain in the clubhouse or change his street clothes and either leave the park or take a seat in the grandstand well removed from the vicinity of his team's bench or bullpen. This immediately brings up images of Bobby Valentine, who of course in 1999 was ejected from a game in the 12th inning and facing peer pressure from his players, went back into the dugout with glasses and a fake mustache on. And though he was trying to be incognito, it didn't work as cameras quickly pointed him out, and he was hit with a 2-game suspension and a $5,000 fine, which was honestly worth it. Maybe one day someone will take advantage and suddenly become a spectator, and maybe this already happened and we have no idea. With many examples, it is known that if the ball deflects off a fielder and over the fence, it is a home run, but there is a case where it's not. We've seen many times where the ball deflects off and over the fence, an outfielder going for a catch, and it just unfortunately bouncing off their glove or their head in the wrong way. But there is a case where it's not a home run. That is Rule 6.09H. If a fielder deflects a fair ball into the stands, it counts as a home run, unless the deflection somehow manages to occur 250 feet or closer to home plate, in which case all runners only advance 2 bases. So basically, if a shallow fly ball or a line drive were to somehow ricochet off an infielder then fly over the fence, then it would just be a double. Right field at Fenway seems to be the only logical place this could happen on a sharp line drive, but if it did, I'm not really sure how it would be measured, unless they were willing to break out at least 250 rulers for precision. This is another thing that would be great to see happen, for the chaos and for the anger. And maybe someday a popped-up bunt will deflect off Sean Murphy and springboard into the upper deck for a double. The next one is more in relation to the stats in the actual game. It's rare that a batter would be pinch hit for in the middle of an at-bat, and even rarer if they are pinch hit for with 2 strikes. And luckily there's a rule that specifies what happens in that outcome. As Rule 10.15b says, if a player pinch hits for a batter in the middle of an at-bat with 2 strikes and strikes out, the at-bat and strikeout are credited to the replaced batter. Any other outcome is credited to the pinch hitter. A pinch hitter appearing in the middle of an at-bat is almost always the result of injury or ejection, or even an example like Joe Girardi changing pitchers mid-at-bat, but did not result in changing the batter. But in these rare situations, the player who was pinch hit for prays they don't strike out, so it does not hurt their average, which is worse than being injured. This is a rule that makes complete sense, and one I've talked about before, but the weirdness comes from one particular word in the rule. Rule 3.01 states, no player shall intentionally discolor or damage the ball by rubbing it with soil, rosin, paraffin, licorice, sandpaper, emery paper, or any other foreign substance. This obviously coming from the dead ball era, when pitchers were allowed to doctor the ball with whatever they could get their hands on, and after the death of Ray Chapman, new rules had to be introduced to make the ball more visible and to put more favor towards the offense, which it did as new balls were introduced, and so was Babe Ruth. But the funny part of the rule is just the licorice. Everything else listed in the rule is something that may be expected when you think of what was used to doctor baseballs, and while I guess licorice does make sense in terms of darkening the ball, it's funny to think this was specifically put in the MLB rulebook because someone was probably rubbing licorice on the ball and the league had to take a stand. And thankfully now, all pitchers are given a licorice check before they step on the mound. This is a kind of obscure rule that is kind of known and answers the question of what would happen if I chucked something at the ball in midair. Rule 7.05b3e states, all runners, including the batter, advance 3 bases if a fielder intentionally touches a fair batted ball with their cap, mask, or any other part of their uniform detached from the proper place on this person. All runners advance 2 bases if the same thing happens on a thrown ball. This is a rule that you know originated in the very early days when someone with a 1000 IQ said, what if I said it and chucked my glove at this ball flying past my head? If it is a ball that looks to be a definite home run, it will still be a home run. There's also a difference in a batted ball and a thrown ball. For example, in 2023, Jose Abreu threw his glove at a ball that was bound to go past him at first, and for this reason, the batter was awarded 2 bases. This is still something that pops up every now and then, even makes the ones who have been in the game for decades say, they haven't seen that one before. Pretty much a way to turn a bad situation into a terrible one. Our next one has to do with making one of the most exciting plays in sports even more exciting when the runner stealing home is hit by the pitch. As Rule 7.05b3e says, if there are 2 strikes on the batter and a runner steals home and the pitch hits the runner in the strike zone, the batter is out. The run does not score if there are 2 outs. If there are less than 2 outs, it does. So in the rare instance where a runner takes off in third, if a legal pitch is thrown and there are 2 strikes, the runner should just not jump into the strike zone, which changes by the minute according to some umpires. But then again, you can consider if there's less than 2 outs, the runner will score though the batter's out. Although I guess the runner was presumably already safe. This has little chance to happen because in the rare instance when a runner takes off for home, the pitcher almost always steps off or freaks out and balks, of course not making it a pitch. This also begs the question of if the runner makes it home way before the 2-strike pitch is delivered, can the runner be used as a target by both the pitcher and the unaware batter who completes the home side squeeze? We will find out when the 2087 World Series ends just like this. A rule created before Pat Venditte became the first amphibious pitcher addressed what pitchers can do if they need to switch arms on the mound. Rule 8.01f states, pitchers are allowed to switch their throwing arm in the middle of an at-bat, but only if they have injured the other arm. If one does, they do not get an opportunity to warm up with the other arm. This rule prevents pitchers from being able to fake an injury and throw with their offhand, because once they do that, there's no returning to throwing with their good arm that was supposedly injured. A few 19th century pitchers threw with both hands because of injury, thus allowing them to pitch more. But aside from some amateur players, and Greg Harris who alternated in 1 inning in 1995, Pat Venditte was the most recent full-time switch pitcher. And the Venditte rule differs here, as back when he was in the majors, he had to announce to the umpire before each at-bat which hand he was going to throw with, and he could not switch until the next batter. That is, of course, unless he injured whatever arm he was throwing with, then having to go with the other arm for the rest of the game by rule, and also not getting any warm-up pitches because we do not have time for that. This is another of the rules that came about many years ago and will probably never matter, because if a pitcher hurts his arm, they're obviously not going to tell him to just go ahead and throw with your other arm. They're obviously just going to bring in another pitcher. But then again, it's in the rule book for a reason. And with Jorangelo Sinjay currently in the minors, maybe the robot umpires will need a refresher. This next one is the most known strange rule in the drop third strike. To anyone who knows baseball, they're probably very aware of this rule, but it remains controversial, and it's one of those that make you wonder how it even became a rule in the first place. The rule allowing a batter to run to first on a strikeout if it is not caught cleanly, and there is no one on first, or there are 2 outs. And while strange, it's one of the oldest rules in baseball, dating back as far as 1796, and in a German book that mentioned that this baseball game kids played allowed players to run to first even if they struck out, in a time when there were no called strikes, and the pitches were more like lobs. A rule also a part of the Knickerbocker Rules of 1845, but 1887 brought the modern rule. And its purpose was, in the fact that before the batter became a runner on a drop 4 strike, no exception was made for when a runner or runners were on base in a forced situation with fewer than 2 outs. Catchers were able to start double or even triple plays by intentionally not holding a final strike. Rule 47-6 was then added in 1887, saying, if all the first base be occupied by a base runner, 4 strikes will be called on him by the umpire, except when 2 hands are already out. The only real change, of course, reducing the number of strikes to 3. This rule that wasn't just a product of its time, as it's still in place, and is still controversial, especially in those rather rare times where the runner does make it to first, such as A.J. Brzezinski in Game 2 of the 2005 ALCS, in what was the wrong call, but heads up to notice that the umpire had not ruled anything, as A.J. would run to first safely. A rule that many hate, especially when it hurts their team, but like the infield fly rule, it's been woven into the fabric of the game, dating back to the 19th century. Our last one is one that is broken in just about every game, and one that you may have broken yourself. Rule 4.06 says, players in uniform shall not address or mingle with spectators, nor sit in the stands before, during, or after a game. No manager, coach, or player shall address any spectator before or during a game. Players of opposing teams shall not fraternize at any time while in uniform. So basically, anytime a player greets another player, acknowledges them, signs something for a fan, or goes into the stands to fight them, they should be ejected. Obviously, this rule sounds insane like most here, but like most, it goes back to the early days. The official rule was intended to contain the threat of corruption and collusion. Of course, gambling scandals have always been there in baseball, with the 1919 Black Sox, Pete Rose, and it continues to this day with Ippei, and whatever may be going on that we don't know. It at least makes a little sense back then, but things have obviously changed. Many players are friends, and a part of the reason players back then would even consider partaking in gambling shenanigans is they didn't make near what they do now. But the rule is still there, and Joe Torre even reminded teams about it in 2011, but that didn't really do anything to stop it. The closest it's come to actually being enforced was in 2020, with the mandates for players to not come in contact with each other. But for some reason, it's still there, and obviously it's not enforced. But maybe one day a desperate coach or a fan will suddenly bring it up, and an umpire will be there to assert their dominance. So most of these rules originated from a specific event way back in the day, and they stayed in there over the years. Most of these rules are rarely enforced, in part because there's not much chance for them to be enforced. But when the robot umpires take over, they will be there to instantly call any of these obscure rules and eliminate anyone who tries to argue. Hopefully you liked this video, and if so, please consider liking and subscribing for new videos every week. Thank you.